Welcome to Leadership Lessons from the Fastlane, brought to you by the Washington Speakers Bureau. In this space, we will explore some of the most pressing challenges that leaders face today with the world's most respected, innovative, curious, and accomplished thought leaders. We'd like to welcome our host, best-selling author and co-author of the recently published book, Choose Love, Not Fear, a WSB exclusive speaker for almost 30 years, Gary Heil.
This is Leadership Lessons from the Fast Lane. I'm Gary Heil. I'm honored and excited today to have Dan Pink with us. Dan's a researcher, a best-selling author, and a compelling communicator. Dan's last couple of decades have been spent challenging our thinking about things that are important to us on a personal and organizational level. And based on his work, he's been named one of the top 10 business thinkers on the planet. Dan recently completed the largest quantitative and qualitative study of regrets, and his new book, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward, has challenged me again, compellingly, to rethink my thinking about everything from learning to the nature of relationships. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for your time today.
Gary, great to be with you.
Yeah, when I was reading the book, I came across this line that put everything in perspective for me. I think you wrote that regret is better understood, less as a thing and more as a process. And it kind of put everything in perspective for me. Did I miss it?
No, I mean, I think that's at the high level of sophistication here. So when we talk about what regret is, because regret is an emotion. It's an emotion that makes us feel bad, but ultimately it's better. I think it's better understood as a process. And when we understand it as a process, we realize in some ways how remarkable it is. It's kind of astonishing that we're able to do that, because what regret is that so we're able to travel in our heads, mental time travel, which is kind of amazing. So let's say that I regret. Let's say I don't want to make it me. Let's say that somebody regrets marrying Bob instead of Fred. All right. So what happens is they go back in time to when they married Bob. All right. So that's even in of itself, the fact that you can go back in time and remember that. But then what's even more amazing is that you negate what really happened. You basically say, I'm done marrying Bob. I'm going to marry Fred. You negate that. You come up with a completely different alternative. And that's itself is amazing. But then you go back in time in your time machine to the future. And now suddenly the future is reconfigured because you've married Fred and not Bob. And this is one reason, and that's what regret is. It's incredibly sophisticated. This is one reason why little kids don't experience regret, is that their brains haven't developed enough. It's why people with certain kinds of brain damage and neurodegenerative disorders don't experience regret, because they lost the muscularity and the dexterity to do that. And so and the reason I raise that is it's something that's so incredibly sophisticated, has to serve a purpose, right? It wouldn't be in our brains if it didn't have a purpose. And the purpose is that if we treat our regrets right, it can help us become better at a whole range of things.
It seems to be, when I was reading it as a process, it just facilitates learning in so many ways, right? We like to think in the research that learning is somewhat euphoric, but we know sometimes it can be anxiety producing, and looking at your regret forces me outside my comfort zone and gets me to learn something, doesn't it?
I mean, that is an incredibly important point. I mean, beyond regret, Gary, I happen to have read a paper literally earlier this week about how actually inviting and seeking discomfort is a way to learn better. And we sort of naturally want to avoid discomfort, but the only way to learn is to invite discomfort. And this is the thing. We have a pile of evidence showing that regret can clarify what we value and instruct us on how to do better. So it can clarify what matters to us in life, and it can teach us how to do things better in the future. But regret hurts. It's unpleasant. It's painful. And so a lot of us want the clarification. We want the instruction, but we don't want the pain. And it doesn't work that way, and it's a package deal. And that pain, that discomfort, that distress is essential in the in the learning. The only way we learn is through some measure of pain, discomfort, and struggle. I mean, think about any sport. Okay, so I'll give you an example. My wife, who never played tennis as a kid, decided that she wanted to learn how to play tennis. And so when you learn how to play tennis when you're 50 years old, it's pretty hard, And so there's a lot of distress and a lot of discomfort, but that's the source of the learning. That's how she's getting better at, following through. It's like, oh my God, the euphoria comes. The discomfort comes when you hit the ball in a gazillion different directions and never get it over the net. And that's discomforting and that's painful. The euphoria that you're talking about comes when it's like, oh my God, I followed through on my forehand and look, the ball sailed exactly where I wanted it to go.
Yeah, and so many times, I mean, in a world that values innovation and adaptability and change and all these things we talk about, it doesn't come without discomfort. And we either wait for somebody to create the discomfort for us. What I thought was brilliant about the book in this way is that I can actually have some of that for myself if I can effectively use my regrets, my feelings about what could have been.
Sure. And here's the thing, like life is full of discomfort. I mean, discomfort is part of life. And we don't have a choice about that. But what we do have a choice about is how we respond to the discomfort. And especially discomfort, any discomfort, including a discomfort like regret. And we can say, ignore it. I ignore discomfort. I steer around it in every circumstance. Or we can say discomfort. Oh my God, I can't do it. It's horrible. I'm debilitated by it. Or we can say, discomfort is here again. My old friend discomfort is here to teach me, to instruct me, to give me signals on what to do. That's how you do it.
And I think that ties right into it. By the way, I loved your obligatory in the book, your obligatory reference to Bill James, which I think we have to have in a book about the idea that our thinking creates our action. And I remember
absolutely.
And I remember reading Ellen Langer for the first time at Harvard when she said that, the problem is that a lot of our action isn't thinking at all. It's really just on autopilot. What I loved about your analysis of it, when you said that feeling creates the thinking, it seems to me that if we use those uneasy feelings that you're talking about inside to make us think, it's almost like a wake-up call to start thinking, isn't it?
In an ideal world, yes, that's sort of what I'm advocating. So, and again, I think part of it is that let's go back to this idea of pain and discomfort and negative feelings more broadly. I don't think our culture does a very good job of helping people contend with negative emotions, even though, as we've been talking, negative emotions are an integral part of life. They're integral in the sense that they are a fixed part of human existence, but they're integral also in the sense that they're instructive. And so, but we don't do a good enough job of helping people deal with negative emotions. And so some of us say negative emotions are for ignoring. That's a bad idea. And then I think what's even worse, and I see some of it out there, is that negative, feeling is for feeling, that negative, feelings are the only truth, that all you should care about is feelings, which is a really bad idea. In my view, feelings are for thinking, that feelings are signals, they're information, they're data. And I think that kind of reframing is that, feeling is for thinking, and we end up acting better when we think about what we do. So it's a chain. Feeling is for thinking is for doing.
Look, I'm a fan of optimism helping us live longer. And I'm a fan of positivity and Barbara Fredrickson's work and the idea that positive emotions can help us play better and work better. But I think you're pointing out, and rightly so, as I was reading it, that these negative emotions like regret, this bad feeling that we get, can spur us forward just as quickly as if we embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's I like to think that readers are as sophisticated as you. In that positive. Let's talk about positive emotions. I like positive emotions. Positive emotions are good. I want to have positive emotions. I want you to have positive emotions. I want to have more positive emotions than negative emotions by a large margin. Positive emotions make life worth living, but a life with only positive emotions is not a good life. All right. A life with only positive emotions is a circumscribed life. It is not a full life because negative emotions exist for a reason. And so what we want to do instead of banishing negative emotions is contend with them, learn from them. Particularly this most common and in my view, most transformative negative emotion of regret. Let's think about something like fear. Fear is a negative emotion. Do I want to go through life without the ability to experience fear? No way. Because there's a reason I'm scared when I cross over 6 lanes of traffic, right? There's a reason I'm scared if my house is on fire, right? It helps me survive, and so negative emotions serve a purpose. They're there for a reason. They are part of our cognitive machinery. And so the idea, so again, there's like a third way here. Don't banish negative emotions. Don't wallow in negative emotions. Confront them.
And when you say confront, what comes to mind for me are people that I've met, and maybe all of us at some point in time, when the emotions that we feel from our regret almost become debilitating because we don't treat ourselves as nicely as we treat others. It's easy for us to say, "Hey, Dan, don't feel bad," but sometimes we've all run into somebody who just beats themselves up, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a core point, and it goes to what we were talking about before, is that we haven't given people a process by which to contend with, confront, contend with, make sense of, extract lessons from these negative emotions. But to my mind, the very first step is what you're talking about, which is, you're sort of inching towards self-compassion. And when we make mistakes, when we screw up, the way we talk to ourselves is vicious. It's cruel. It's absurd. I mean, I don't want to make this like someone else's problem. It's what I do. If you were to hear my own self-talk in the face of mistakes, you'd think I was nuts. And I would never talk to anybody else that way. So the question then becomes, if I don't want to talk to anybody else that way, why should I talk to myself that way? That is like what the research tells us is you shouldn't treat yourself better than anybody else, but you shouldn't treat yourself worse than anybody else. So, a starting point in arresting that march toward rumination that you're talking about is treating yourself with kindness rather than contempt, recognizing that your mistakes are part of the human condition, and recognizing that any screw up and setback you have is a moment in your life, not the full measure of your life. And when we do that, that itself is a way to prevent this. I don't know if I want to call it a slide or a march, but sometimes as you're saying, these negative emotions take over. And what you want to do is you just want to put up a wall. You want to put up a barrier. You want to sort of slow that march or stymie that march.
It's almost like the old saw that went something like to err is human and to forgive is divine, right? So like we have to forgive ourselves a little bit, right, to learn from them.
I mean, that's it. And, and the thing is, like, even saying that sounds a little gooey. And even this whole line of research of self-compassion, that phrase to me sounds a little gooey, but with self-compassion, there's 20 years of research showing it's powerful. And the other thing is that there's, you think about something like self-criticism, especially this lacerating self-criticism that many of us are very good at. There's essentially no evidence that it's effective, So we think, oh, I'm going to be tough on myself. I'm going to call myself a freaking idiot. But there's no evidence that's effective. What's effective is self-compassion. There's actually much less evidence than we think that self-esteem is effective. What's really effective is self-compassion.
I love this idea that you're saying gooey, because it always sounds gooey, but anything like love or compassion or things we call gooey, they just happen to be human, right? And
Exactly.
So you were contaminating me this week. So I'm reading your book, and I walked up to a guy and I said, they were talking, and I said, "So what do you regret?" Just like what? And of course he says to me, he says, "I don't regret anything." He says, "I don't have regrets," right? And you can see in his face this thing, and for fear of not being gooey, I didn't push it. But you must have seen a lot of that in the research where like this guy's like, "I don't want to admit I have any regrets." And it's not possible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because we've been fed this bill of goods that saying you have no regrets is a marker of healthy living. that saying you have no regrets is a sign of courage, when in fact it's not. It's performed courage. Real courage is looking your regrets in the eye and doing something about them. But there are all kinds of ways. So, I mean, you mentioned I did 2 different surveys. One was a quantitative survey, the largest public opinion survey ever conducted of American attitudes about regret. So we asked this very large sample a question. We asked them the question, how often do you look back on your life and wish you had done things differently? How often do you look back on your life and wish you had done things differently? So I'm describing regret, but I'm not using the R word. And what we found was, when you sort of come up with clever ways to bypass that no regrets fog machine, we had 87% of the sample, 83% of the sample saying they did it at least occasionally. Only 1% of the sample said that they never did this thing. Now, if I had called it regret, I think we probably would have gotten answers like the guy that you gave. But I mean, I even had people in the qualitative portion of it. It was pretty funny, where I just collected regrets from all over the world. I had people who would come to the World Regret Survey, okay, and then say, they would type in, I don't have any regrets. Then, I mean, I'm not joking around. Then there's like dozens of them. I don't have any regrets, but there was a time when I was a kid that I bullied somebody, and I feel really bad about it and can't stop thinking about it, but I don't have any regrets.
It's for some reason, this idea that it's starting to admit these feelings I have, just, again, it feels to some gooey, I think, but it's the gooey stuff that really is what's human.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the research just for a second, Dan, about what you found as the core regrets, because I found it intriguing especially in light of the past research, where everything seemed to be education focused in the beginning, right? And it seems to me that human beings usually don't like complexity as much as they like simplicity. So they were talking about symptoms, but you seem to take it a level of abstraction higher and go that these regrets are really signals about our core needs, our core parts of being human.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And I think that, again, to get in the weeds a little bit, which, I mean, I know you'll join me in the weeds. I don't know whether many of your listeners will, but I think it sort of shows you what you can find in the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. So in the quantitative research, I had people, this giant public opinion survey, I asked people their regrets, and I had them slot their regrets in certain categories: career, education, romance, whatever. And I found what everybody else had found, which is that these regrets are all over the place. Then in the qualitative stuff, where I have this database now of over 20,000 regrets from people in 109 countries, and I read through the first 15,000 of them. Okay, so I got a lot of people who have a regret that says, a lot of American college graduates who have a regret. I went to college and I had a chance to study abroad, but I thought it was too risky, so I didn't do it, and now I regret it. Okay, that's an education regret. Then I have hundreds around the world. X years ago, there was a man or a woman who I really liked. I wanted to ask him, her out on a date, but I didn't, and now I regret it. That's a romance regret. Then we have gobs. I always wanted to start a business, but I never had the guts to step up and do it, and I've been in this lackluster job for 20 years. That's a career regret. All right, so clearly those are in totally different domains of life, but to my mind, they're the same regret. Those are the same regret. They're a regret about being at a juncture in your life, having a chance to play it safe or to take the chance, and not taking the chance and then regretting it. And I think that deep down, what was going on there, this more significant finding in those regrets was not taking the chance. And that's what really bugs people. And if you go one layer beneath, you find that it's less about the domains of people's lives than it is about this kind of hidden architecture underneath those domains. And as you know, I argue that hidden architecture tells us a lot about what people want out of life and even what makes life worth living.
Yeah, and in the 4 regrets that I found myself as I went through your 4, whether it's taking a bold route or whether they were moral regrets or about connection, I found myself in the very essence of your regrets and being human. Once you identify them and you call them out as you have in the book, they become more apparent, don't they?
We've known this for decades and decades and decades. I mean, when we name things, they become clearer, but also when we name things, they become less demonic. I mean, we try to teach that to kids when kids experience emotions, particularly negative emotions. Little kids, it's like what's helpful with little kids when they're feeling angry is saying, okay, Maria, like that feeling you have where your chest feels hot and you're a little bit jumpy, that's called anger. I experience anger sometimes too. Here's what happens. Here are the situations where I experience anger. Here's what I do to contend with anger. And when we name stuff, it's less menacing and it helps us begin the process of making sense of it.
Yeah. It always has occurred to me, and you and I had a conversation about this once before, that when you look at our lives at work, not just at home, but when you look at our lives at work, and if we're regretting some of the taking the time about the foundational things, or choosing a different, more novel, bolder route, or valuing relationships, or doing the right thing, that in many of the cultures in which we work, those things aren't exactly rewarded, or that we sometimes reward just the opposite of it, creating the regrets. If we want to really engage people long term, don't we as leaders have to think about the regrets people have and make it more likely that they'll take a different route? Because even if they understand it, they've got to take the risk of being that way, right?
I mean, I agree with you, but I'm no surprise, because you helped me figure this out, months and months and months ago, helped me start thinking this through months and months ago, which is that, I mean, another way to put it is that, if these regrets that we're talking about reveal what people want out of life, then why would they not want it out of the part of their life where they're working? I mean, it's not like people are not that compartmentalized. So if people regret not taking the chance, and I think that when people regret not taking the chance, what the need that it's surfacing is a need to learn and to grow and to do stuff and to actually contribute in this vanishingly short amount of time that we're alive. Then why should organizations not want to create the conditions for that, with psychological safety, with places where people can take chances, where people feel emboldened to speak up and stand up and step up. And so, I do think that these regrets offer clues about how to build a coherent, meaningful, effective corporate culture.
And in your book, you talk about this fundamental attribution error, which I really agree with, which is the idea that we sometimes blame ourselves, or we look at everything as a personal choice, and we underestimate the context in which we're in.
Sure, and I think that offers lessons for organizations too on a whole variety of things. So let me give you, I'll give you two examples of that, and it's important in sort of how we think this through. So I got a lot of regrets that I call foundation regrets, and foundation regrets are small decisions you make early that accumulate to negative consequences later on. And one of the biggest types of these foundation regrets are regrets about spending too much and saving too little. So people say, "Oh my God, I spent too much and I saved too little." And I am 39 years old and I have zero net worth. I have a negative net worth. And now in some cases, and I interviewed people like that, it's totally their fault. I mean, they did spend too much and they did save too little. It's on them. But if you show me another 39-year-old who says, "You know what, I've been working since I was 25 and out of school, and I haven't been able to save any money." And I find out that person was a first generation college student who then went on to graduate school and is dealing with $200,000 of student debt, and who is, helping support her family. Okay, that's not totally on you. So I think that's one way to think about the foundation regrets. The boldness regrets, I'll give you the best example of this from the boldness regrets, which are, I have a lot of regrets, a surprising number of them. Regrets about speaking up. If I go into my database and search the phrase "speak up," "spoken up," "speaking up," those kinds of things, I get a lot. And so that happens a lot in the workplace. Oh, I should have spoken up. But that's not totally on the person. That's about, in many cases, much more about being in an organization that didn't have the psychological safety that allowed people to speak up. So leaders want to create conditions in which people can do these things that are fundamentally part of a flourishing life. and that'll help people do their best work and be their best selves. In fact, do their best work because they can be their best selves.
I think that's such a key part of the book that I got from reading it, Dan, which was, if I understand from your research that people want to speak up, they would like to take a bolder route through life. They would like to do the right thing, and they value connection and belongingness. That if we as leaders, right, want to create an engagement that hasn't gone up in 10 years or 20 years, then we should take these emotions that you've pointed out, and they should guide our actions a little more, because being aware of that seems so key to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I'll be your hallelujah chorus for that one. That if these regrets give us clues about what people value, then they also give us clues about what people value in the workplace. They give us clues about how to build a culture that is coherent and meaningful. And you mentioned belongingness. I think that's a big takeaway from this. I was surprised at how many connection regrets, as I call them, if only I'd reached out, had to do with friends and even colleagues and ex-colleagues, and not about romantic partners. So you dropped the ultra gooey word of love, about 10 minutes ago. And I think there's something, again, the HR people won't like this, but I think there's something to be said for talking more explicitly about love inside of organizations. Because what I found is that when people drift apart from friends and don't do anything, when they drift apart from colleagues and don't do anything, what they're missing in some sense is love. It's not romantic love, but it's a powerful kind of companionate love that gives people meaning and wholeness and richness in their lives.
Yeah, and I think I'm singing the hallelujah chorus, because I'm reading the book and I'm thinking, here is a database of people's experiences that are yelling at the top of their voice, thanks to you giving them a voice, that I want this. Make no mistake, I want this.
Right.
It's a cultural survey without being a cultural survey, and it's your data yelling, I want this. And any leader that doesn't read this and go, well, if you want it that badly, what am I doing to create it? I mean, because we spend $16 billion a year trying to create better leaders, and everybody was celebrating last year because engagement went up 1%. And still 2/3 of
Right.
the people aren't engaged. And
Right.
I'm feeling like I'm the one that's singing the chorus thanks to you, because you've got the data that says, please read me. How about this idea, Dan? I think is important about this. You lead the chapter with it. You say, I think opportunity versus obligation. I thought that was very interesting, that one would stay with me longer but not move my behavior as much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you this got me thinking again about what constitutes a good life. And if you look at these 4 core regrets, some of them are about opportunity and some of them are about obligation. So you look at like a boldness regret, if only I'd taken the chance, that's almost all about opportunity. If you look at something like a moral regret, if only I'd done the right thing, that's almost all about obligation. And then the connection regrets can be a mix. It's about opportunity and obligation. And the foundation regrets, if only I'd done the work, are also in some ways about opportunity and obligation. And I found, again, I wasn't looking for this. It just kind of it screamed out at me, is that, so much of what our lives are this mix of opportunity and obligation. I don't think that a good life is all opportunity. I think there's a hollowness to that. If all I'm doing is pursuing opportunity, I don't think that's a fully realized life. That said, I think that if you're only pursuing obligation, there's a kind of narrowness, there's a kind of crimpedness to that. I don't think that's a fully realized life. I think a fully realized life is a life that fuses opportunity and obligation. And again, if you go back to this idea of what does qualitative research tell us, particularly at the scale that I did it, you have 15,000 people who are telling you this. And if you just tune your ears a little bit, that's what they're telling you. They're telling you that a good life fuses opportunity and obligation. It doesn't singularly focus on one or the other. And that, again, that made me think differently about my own life.
And mine too, I might add, from reading it. Thank you very much, keeping me up at night, Dan. I think about that. I spent some time wrestling with this idea on the opportunity side, that you say it moves behavior less. It doesn't create as much change, the regrets about opportunity. Did I get that right?
Well, sort of. I mean, I think that the regrets about, it's interesting. It's sort of in some ways there's a different, it's related to the difference between regrets of action and inaction, and how we deal with them. So with regrets of action, we can do something about them. It's more obvious what we can do about them. So if I have hurt somebody, it's an action regret. I can go back and apologize. I can try to make amends. I can try to make restitution. I can try to repair the damage, right? I can also try to take away some of the psychological sting with, finding the silver lining. And I saw this in the database where, people say, usually women, I shouldn't have married that guy, but at least I got these two great kids. So I find a silver lining there. With inaction regrets, they're harder to resolve. You can't undo them, and they're harder to find a silver lining. I think that's why they linger so long. And I think tied to that is the fact that we don't have a process for what do we do when we have a regret about opportunity. Regrets about opportunity are generally inaction regrets. What do we do when we have a regret about opportunity or inaction? How do we process that? And most of us have been left clueless and adrift at how we process that.
Yeah, and when we talk about attaining visions and innovation and opportunities and stuff like that, it really is up to what I was getting from this about how do we do it within ourselves? How do we use those regrets to move us to take the road less traveled in a way? And I thought that was part of what I was really getting from it.
Yeah.
The grant study amazed me. You're talking about this study over 70 or 80 years that ended up, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly well-known study. Started in must have been the 1920s or 30s. That initially focused on men. It was all men, all white men at Harvard. But what it did is, in an incredibly long-running and very intrusive way, monitor their lives, their psychological lives, their financial lives, their romantic lives, their physical lives for decades and decades and decades and decades. And it was one of those. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about positive psychology earlier. It was in some ways the first serious attempt to understand human flourishing. Why do some people flourish and other people flounder? And so they're looking at that. So is it intelligence? Is it income? What is it? And one of the guy who led this study for several decades has an unpublished manuscript that I tracked down, where he says, well, I can summarize the answer to our question in 5 words. And he says, happiness is love, full stop. The people who flourish were people who had people in their lives that they loved and who loved them. The people who didn't flourish lacked that. Money didn't matter. Physical health didn't matter that much. I mean, I was surprised by that people with chronic illnesses were flourishing if they had people around them who loved. People who were the picture of physical health were not flourishing if they didn't have people around them who they loved and who loved. Income didn't matter. Education level didn't matter. Professional achievement didn't matter. What mattered was that gooey word, one more time here, love.
It comes down to me when I look at this, Dan, and reacting to it in a very positive way. I had a great time reading the book. Is that as I look through our words of what we want in life from leaders, right? We want change, and we want learning, and we want innovation, and we want people taking a bolder route. And you talk to people like Jill Ellis leading the women's national team, and she says you got to love them even if they don't love you back, right?
That's interesting.
And it's amazing to me how many great leaders you interview who are willing to use the gooey words and willing to do the hard work of learning. And I'm wondering, as I get finished with this thing, and I read it a second time, and it's jumping off the page to me that the data yells out, and I wanted to get your comment on the data yells out. I'm more in control of my own life than I think, and these regrets that I feel push me to thinking about the kind of life I want to lead and what risks I'm willing to take to do it. And this grant study wraps it together and says it's a lot easier if I'm in relationships with people that are fulfilling, right?
Absolutely.
Is it way too
No.
gooey, Dan?
No. I'm basically using gooey a little bit as a straw man, because I don't believe that it's gooey. I do believe that other people think it's gooey, and maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think that is, as you say, what the data are calling out. I mean, there's other research in motivation science showing that when we have social support, we're more likely to achieve our goals. So that social support, and let's call it love, matters for fundamental reasons, because it makes us feel better and find purpose and meaning in life. But it also matters in instrumental ways. We get more done when we're in conditions of love. I also think that your point, and again, this is why I found studying regret revelatory, because it's making me think about things that I hadn't thought about and giving me a window into it that I hadn't considered before. And you mentioned one of them, which is that you said a moment ago that maybe this tells us that we have more control over our lives than we think. And I think that is an insight in this. Again, I don't think we don't have perfect control. We don't have complete control. But I think that understanding where our control starts and stops is fundamental to flourishing. And when we reflect on our regrets, we help interrogate that. So I'll give you one specific example here. So I did this thing myself that I recommend in the book called a failure resume, where you list all your failures, screw ups, mistakes, setbacks. Then in the next column, you list what lesson you learned from it. And then in the final column, you list what you're going to do about it. So I listed these mistakes, screw ups, and setbacks. And then I started looking for lessons from each of them. And in some of them, there wasn't a lesson. It didn't work. Shit happens. Bad luck, randomness. And there's something kind of relieving about that, because there were plenty of them where it was my fault, where I did have control, and sort of going through that process of figuring out, where do I have sovereignty? Where do I have some control? And where do I not? I think that's fundamental to human flourishing,
Yeah. And I totally agree. And I want to emphasize just this one thing, because I keep thinking about it when you said happiness is love, full stop, from the study. And I agree with you. We make fun of gooey because people think it's gooey, but I don't think either one of us think it's not fundamental to what it takes. I mean, Thomas Aquinas said that love, in the way we're talking about, is wishing the best for others. And when we're around people who wish the best for others and wish the best for us, there's a lot less fear and a lot more willingness to look at the data and go, you know what, I have more control.
I think that's I haven't thought about it quite that way, but I do think when we're around other people who are, I'm just going to repeat back what you said, because I never thought of it quite this way. When you're around other people who wish the best for us, you have more control. And I think that's a profoundly important point, that we affirm our humanity, we affirm our sovereignty, if we surround ourselves with people who care about us, who are rooting for us, who love us. And if we're going to do that, we have an obligation to send that out too, to be people who want the best for other people and improve that. And there's even, we managed to go 45 minutes without a sports analogy. So let me introduce one. It's like in team sport. This is true for team sports. It's also true in music. It's true in theater. That there are performers who make other people better. They're good individual performers, but when they are on stage or when they're on the court, one of the things that makes them great is they make other people great. And we want to be one of those people. You want to be one of those people, and you want to surround yourself with those kinds of people, because again, and this is the point that I hadn't fully thought about, it gives you more control.
It does, and I think I thank you for doing the research and writing the book. And I do believe it is to all of our benefit to realize a little bit in the weeds that our learning is within our control. And if we understand what the basics of human nature are and know what those feelings are that well up inside us, we can deal with them. And I thank you for pointing those things out to me personally. I do thank you for doing that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for reading the book, and thanks for the great insights. Even in this conversation, it's really gotten me to think about things in new ways. So I appreciate that.
So Dan, before we go, what are you reading? Everybody wants to know one of the best thinkers in business in the world. What are you reading?
You know what? These days, I'm actually reading a decent amount of fiction. The last book that I think there's a lot to be said for I think there's a lot to be said for reading across disciplines and reading across genres. So the last book I finished, I literally finished it last night, is a book called Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead, who's a great novelist, one of my favorite. And then I think the next book on the stack is this one here, it's a novel called by Dan Shawn called Sleepwalk. I find that fiction helps me see things a little bit differently. If I read science the whole time, I would be an even more boring guy than I am right now.
2 leaders, living or dead, who most influenced your thinking or you most admire.
2 leaders, living or dead. Well, I'm going to go with one of them. I'm going to go with a pretty obvious choice, and that is Nelson Mandela. And I think that we, in some ways, I stand in awe of him in part because he was treated so poorly for so long, and then when he attained power, he didn't act with any vengeance. He actually acted with, it's the word of the hour, love. And the way that he took over that presidency after such incredibly profound individual mistreatment, to me, is like breathtaking. I don't think I'm a good enough person to do that. I think if I were in his shoes, I would not have been able to do that. So that's one. Another one would be, it's funny that she's gotten a lot of press, sort of retrospective press recently. But I remember when I was a little kid growing up in Ohio, and I first heard about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. And I just thought that was so audacious, like what you're doing there. Like here's this woman with no formal power, zero. In fact, in some ways, because of her conditions, negative formal power. He was able to do something audacious, ingenious, and incredible. So I've always, honestly, ever since I was a little kid, I have admired Harriet Tubman. So those are the 2 that I would pick. Interesting question.
Great. And I guess the last question for you is, I'm a young person, which obviously I've got a challenge with, but I come to you and I sit there and say, hey, Dan, one piece of advice you could give me, just one piece of advice that you would enrich my life or help me become the better me at work or at home. What one piece of advice would you give a young person starting out in an organization that you think would help their career?
I would say that the one piece of advice that I would give would be to begin with the assumption of positive intent when you deal with other people. Assume other people have positive intent. You probably do too. You're not that special. Other people do. And when you do, I don't think everybody has positive intent, but let them disprove that rather than be cautious and suspicious and untrusting at the outset. And I think one reason that I realize that is that everybody I know, once you get to know them a little bit more, you realize that what you're seeing on the surface is a tiny fraction of who they are. And nearly everybody, when you get beneath the surface of that tiny fraction that you see, they're people who have had some struggles. They're people who have dealing with their own imperfections. They're people who are dealing with their own set of crises, just like you. And if you begin with basically that kind of approach of positive intent and empathy, I actually think that you're going to you're going to get more done, and you're going to understand people at a deeper level. And that's a change for me, because I, for a long time didn't begin with that assumption. I began with the assumption that most people did not have positive intent. And I began with the assumption that what I saw was everything there is. And that turned out to be colossally wrong.
Wow, it's strong. It's very helpful for me personally. Dan, thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't just not only thank you for your time today and your wisdom, but I also want to shout out a special thanks for your work with Drive. I think that your work in Drive forced popular America to rethink our needed to be rethought theory of motivation that underlies most organizational theory today. So I thank you for that. Thank you for this book and my week of going around and asking people what their regrets are and understanding how much I had to learn about my own feelings inside me. So I thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I also like to thank the Washington Speakers Bureau for continuing to support the conversations with thought leaders like Dan that help us challenge our thinking in every part of our lives. So thank you to WSB also.
Thank you, Gary. What a pleasure. Thanks for having me.